I used to tell myself it was just temporary. The late nights, the oil-stained hoodie, the smell of tomato sauce living rent-free in my clothes. Delivering pizzas wasn't anyone's dream job, but it paid what my college schedule could survive on. Rent didn't care about ambition, and neither did my beat-up hatchback that needed coaxing every time it hit a red light. It was just past 11 when the shop started to wind down. My manager was mopping, someone was scrubbing the fryer, and the radio had shifted from top 40 pop to the kind of old soft rock that only played after closing hours. I was ready to clock out when the order buzzed in, prepaid, no special notes, but with an address that made me frown. A high-rise downtown, not the kind of place that usually ordered from us. Most of my deliveries were to walk-ups with broken buzzers, or basements where the smell of damp was stronger than the smell of food. This building, though, I knew it. Glass and steel, sitting like a mirror among Portland's quiet streets. The kind of tower you passed and wondered what the rent would be if you sold your soul. Last run? My coworker called from the counter. Yeah, I said, sliding the pizza into the insulated bag. Hopefully a big tip to make it worth it. He laughed, shaking his head. They never tip big in those places. They think exposure to their air is payment enough. I grinned, but the truth was, I didn't care about the tip. I just wanted the night to end. My eyes stung, my hands were sticky from dough, and the car seat felt like an old friend who understood exhaustion better than anyone else. Downtown was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that hummed beneath streetlights. The city wasn't asleep, just catching its breath. I parked outside the tower, still half expecting security to wave me off, but the doorman only glanced at the pizza bag, gave a small nod, and gestured me toward the lifts. The elevator mirrored my face back at me. Messy hair, flowers still dusting the sleeve of my hoodie, name tag slightly crooked. Ryan Carter, 22, exhausted and underpaid. I straightened the tag anyway. Appearance mattered, they said, especially when you were representing the brand. The ride up was smooth, too smooth, like the building didn't believe in noise. Floor numbers lit up one by one. 21, 24, 28. When the doors finally opened on 32, I stepped into a hallway that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Thick carpet, framed abstract art. The faint smell of new paint and money. The door number glinted in brass. I adjusted the pizza bag on my knee and knocked. 3 quick taps, polite, professional. I was already rehearsing my script in my head. Confirm order. Present change. Smile. Leave. But when the door opened, every word dissolved. The man who answered wasn't what I expected. Bare shoulders, damp hair curling at the ends, a towel knotted casually at his waist. For half a second, I thought I'd made a mistake. Wrong apartment, wrong delivery, wrong universe. He looked at me with calm, steady eyes. That was fast, he said, voice low, smooth like someone who didn't need to rush for anything. Traffic's kind at this hour, I managed, hating how bright my voice sounded. I lifted the bag slightly, a shield between us. 1 large margarita with extra basil. He smiled. Not a full one, just the start of it. That's the one. Come in while I find my wallet. It's fine, I said quickly. Company policy was clear. Stay at the door. But he'd already stepped aside, leaving the space open between us. His tone wasn't commanding, though. More like an invitation. Polite, effortless. My hesitation melted a little under it. Against better judgment, I stepped inside. The apartment was everything I'd imagined wealth looked like. Minimalist furniture, soft lighting, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, framing the city like a painting. There was a faint smell of cedar in the air, clean and grounding. He gestured toward the counter. You can set it down there. I did, keeping my focus on the pizza box as if it could protect me from the awareness crawling up my neck. Large margarita, I said, repeating the line because professionalism was all I had left to hold on to. He opened a drawer, then another, the sound of clinking objects echoing softly through the quiet. I could have sworn my wallet was right here, he murmured, half to himself. No rush, I said, though every cell in my body screamed to stay calm. Are you always this polite, or do they teach that in training? He asked, glancing at me with that same faint smile. I try not to get yelled at, I said. It's a survival instinct. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that didn't match the cold perfection of the apartment. Fair enough. He checked another drawer, then looked up again. You live nearby? Not really, I said. About 20 minutes out, depending on how much my car hates me that day. That earned another small laugh. He leaned against the counter, the towel still impossibly casual. 22? I blinked. How'd you... You've got that look, he said. Still figuring out if you want to change the world? or just survive it? I'm mostly just trying to survive tuition, I said, smiling before I could stop myself. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. I remember that. When I was your age, I used to count time in coffee cups and overdraft notices. Sounds relatable, I said. I hope it's temporary for you, he replied softly. Something in his tone caught me off guard. Sincere, almost too kind. The silence stretched between us, steady and strangely warm. I noticed a single cufflink beside his keys. A plant that was either fake or very well cared for. A small crack in the corner of a picture frame. Little imperfections that made the space feel human. He finally found his wallet under a stack of mail. There we go, he said, relief flickering in his expression. He opened it, frowned lightly. I don't have cash. It's fine, I said quickly. The app already went through. He hesitated, looking at me like there was something else he wanted to say. Still, I should thank you properly. That's really not. He smiled again, the kind that softened the air around him. Relax, Ryan, he said, reading my name tag. I'm not going to make it weird. The way he said my name, slow, deliberate, made it impossible not to feel a pulse of awareness. I appreciate it, I said finally. Trying to sound normal, he stepped back, giving me space. Well, thank you for braving the tower of corporate loneliness to bring me a piece of comfort food. I laughed softly, unsure why it came so easily. All in a night's work. As I turned to leave, he said, Drive safe, okay? The words were simple, but the tone carried weight. Gentle, genuine, almost intimate. Always do. I lied. In the elevator, the mirrored walls caught my reflection again. Same face, same uniform, but something in my expression had changed. Something unsettled and curious. By the time I reached the car, the box smell had faded, but his voice hadn't. Relax, Ryan. It replayed in my head, looping through the hum of the engine and the blur of city lights. It should have been just another delivery, but as I drove through Portland's quiet streets, I kept seeing the way he'd smiled. Not like a customer, not like a stranger, but like someone who'd already decided the night wasn't over. I told myself to forget it. But even as I parked outside my small apartment and killed the engine, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It buzzed, faintly, persistently, with the echo of something I couldn't name yet. And that's when I realized the night hadn't ended at all. It had just started pretending it was over. It had been 4 days since that strange delivery. 4 days of telling myself I'd imagined most of it. The apartment, the towel, the way his voice curled around my name like it had weight. I'd replayed it in my head more times than I cared to admit, usually while driving or waiting for the next order to pop up on the screen. Every time I told myself it was nothing, just a customer, just a weird moment. People were unpredictable, that was all. So when the address appeared again, same tower, same floor, same unit, I froze. My first instinct was to hit reject. Someone else could take it. But my thumb hovered over the screen longer than it should have. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that it wasn't about him. But when I accepted the order, my heart beat a little faster anyway. The drive felt shorter this time. I didn't even notice the traffic lights or the music on the radio. My brain was running too many quiet conversations in advance. What if he didn't remember me? What if he did? By the time I pulled up to the building, I'd given myself a whole speech about professionalism and boundaries. A speech I forgot the second the doorman recognized me. 32 again? He said with a faint smirk, pressing the elevator button before I could answer. Guess he liked the pizza, I muttered, avoiding eye contact. The elevator doors slid shut. This time, I didn't fix my hair or check my reflection. I just stared at the numbers climbing higher, feeling the tension in my stomach rise with them. When the door opened, Marcus was already there, fully dressed this time. Dark jeans, a soft-looking jumper, hair still damp but neatly combed back. The sight of him standing in that doorway again knocked something loose in me. Ryan, he said, like he'd been expecting me. You're fast. My name hit differently this time. He hadn't read it off my tag. He remembered it. Lucky timing, I managed, forcing a smile. He opened the door wider. Come in. No disappearing wallets tonight, I promise. I hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. The apartment looked softer somehow. A lamp on instead of bright ceiling lights. Music humming low from a speaker. Something wordless and steady, filling the space without crowding it. Marcus set 2 plates on the counter while I unpacked the pizza. I figured you might be hungry too, he said casually. I can't really... I started, then stopped when he raised an eyebrow. Technically, he said with a smile. We're just two people sharing food. No company policies being violated. That logic was shaky at best, but it worked. I sat down on the opposite side of the counter. The pizza steam curled between us, smelling of basil and cheese. For a few minutes, we ate in silence. The kind that wasn't awkward, just unhurried. He moved with quiet precision, the kind of man who noticed details but didn't flaunt it. Eventually, he said, "You always work nights?" "Mostly," I said. "Classes during the day. Deliveries pay better after 10. He nodded slowly, chewing thoughtfully. "College? Community. I'm finishing my degree part-time. It's a slow crawl." He smiled faintly. "The slow ones usually last longer." The way he said it made me look up. There was no judgment in his eyes, only something warm and patient. He reached for a napkin, then hesitated, almost as if debating whether to speak. "Can I tell you something without it sounding like I'm oversharing with the pizza guy?" I laughed lightly. "Sure. My rates for listening are cheaper than therapy." That earned a quiet chuckle, but the humor faded quickly. "I'm separated," he said after a pause. "Was married for almost 8 years. "Oh," I said softly. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," he said, almost smiling again. "I barely remember it myself some days. He moved out a year ago, but the apartment still feels full of his ghost. Every room remembers him better than I do." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, letting the silence stretch. He looked down at his hands, fingers tracing the edge of his plate. "Sorry, that's heavy, I know. I just haven't said it out loud in a while. I don't really talk to anyone who isn't part of that whole world." "What world?" "The one where people ask how you're doing but already know the version they want to hear," he said, eyes distant for a moment. "It's exhausting pretending to be fine all the time." Something about that hit too close. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I get that." He looked up, curious. "I live alone," I admitted. "My friends all moved back home after graduation, and my flatmate spends more time at his girlfriend's than in our place. Some nights I just keep the TV on so it feels like someone's still there." Marcus studied me like he was trying to fit that piece into a puzzle he hadn't realized he was building. "That's honest," he said finally, "I guess." I shrugged. "It's just easier to be lonely when it's noisy." He leaned back against the counter, watching me with quiet intensity. "You'd be surprised how many people in buildings like this would agree with you." The conversation slowed again, but not because it had run out. It just settled, low and calm, like two people breathing in sync. For the first time, I noticed small imperfections in him, a faint scar near his jaw, a tiredness behind his eyes that made him seem more human than before. He broke the silence. "Do you ever think about leaving, starting somewhere new?" "All the time," I said. "But I can't even afford a weekend off, so moving feels like science fiction." He smiled softly, but there was sadness in it. "I thought I had everything I wanted once. Career, home, marriage, and then one day I woke up and realized none of it made me feel alive." I didn't know what to say, so I just let him talk. There was something cathartic about listening, like he'd been holding those words in for too long. After a while, he looked at me again. "Sorry, I didn't mean to turn dinner into therapy." "I told you," I said, half smiling. "Cheaper rates." That drew a real laugh this time, one that filled the room. It startled me how good it sounded. The quiet that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, settled, like the space between two songs. He stood, collecting the plates. "Do you want some water before you go?" "Sure," I said. He poured 2 glasses and set one in front of me. The condensation trailed down the side like a thin silver line. Our fingers brushed briefly as I reached for it. Accidental, but enough to make the air tighten. He didn't move away, and neither did I. The silence hummed again. That same quiet charge from the first night. "Marcus," I said finally, just to break it. He looked up, surprised. "You remembered." "I remember most things," I said. He smiled at that. A real, gentle smile. "Good. I was starting to think I'd imagined you." The words came out softly, but they landed with weight. I drained the glass just to have something to do, then set it down carefully. "I should go. Long night ahead." He nodded but didn't move. "Thanks for staying a bit." "Thanks for the pizza," I replied, grinning faintly. As I turned toward the door, he said my name again. "Ryan." I stopped. There was something different in his tone this time. Quiet, deliberate, yeah? He shook his head lightly, almost smiling. "Nothing. Just wanted to say it once more." I didn't answer. I just smiled and stepped into the hallway. The elevator ride down felt slower than usual. I watched my reflection in the mirrored wall again. The same uniform, same crooked name tag, but a different face. Softer somehow. When I reached the car, I sat for a while before turning the engine on. The city outside was still and pale, and inside my chest something was moving. Small, uncertain, but real. His voice replayed in my mind. The way he'd said it. Ryan. Not as a formality. Not as a customer remembering a delivery boy. It had sounded almost like recognition. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that simple sound was enough to keep me awake for the rest of the night. It started as a drive. At least, that's what I told myself when I left my apartment past midnight. Just a drive to clear my head. No delivery, no destination, no excuse other than the silence that had grown too loud inside my flat. The streets of Portland were nearly empty, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the only person left awake in the world. My hands moved on the wheel out of habit, turning corners without permission, until the glow of the city rose ahead of me. Before I realized where I was going, I'd already taken the exit that led downtown. The tower appeared through the windshield like a confession I wasn't ready to make. Its glass caught the streetlights, cutting them into shards of gold. I slowed at the corner, heart thudding in my throat. I could still turn around. I could drive home and pretend this was just a random route, a coincidence of muscle memory. But I didn't. I parked half a block away and sat there with the engine idling, fingers gripping the steering wheel. Every rational part of me was shouting that this was insane. You don't show up uninvited. You don't blur the line between customer and curiosity. But another part of me, the quiet, restless one, whispered that I hadn't stopped thinking about him for days. The way he'd said my name. The way he'd looked at me like he could see past all the surface chatter and exhaustion. That was what scared me most. Not attraction, but recognition. By the time I stepped out of the car, my pulse was hammering. The night air was sharp against my skin. When I reached the lobby, the same doorman was there, newspaper folded under his arm. He looked up, recognizing me immediately. "Evening," he said, like I belonged there. "Hi," I replied, fumbling for a plausible lie. "I, forgot something last time. A receipt." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "He's in. Go ahead." The elevator ride was slower than I remembered. Each floor number lit up with the deliberate rhythm of a heartbeat. 32. The door opened, and before I could even lift my hand to knock, his door was already opening. Marcus stood there, barefoot, wearing a gray jumper and jeans. His hair was slightly tousled, his expression calm, too calm, like he'd expected this. "I knew you'd come," he said softly. I froze in the hallway, feeling both exposed and relieved. "I shouldn't have," I said, voice rougher than I meant it to be. "I know," he replied, then, stepping aside, "but you're here anyway." I hesitated just long enough for the air to thicken between us, then crossed the threshold. The apartment felt different now. Warmer. The overhead lights were off, replaced by a single lamp on the side table, casting honey-colored light across the room. A record spun quietly in the corner, a low, wordless hum that filled the silence. The city shimmered outside the wide glass windows, its glow softened by the distance. He poured 2 glasses of something, wine, probably, and handed one to me without asking. "I thought about calling you," he said, settling onto the sofa, "but I didn't want to make you choose." I sat on the other end, still holding the glass I hadn't touched. "And yet, here I am," he smiled faintly. "Here you are. For a while we didn't talk. The only sounds were the faint crackle of the record and the city breathing outside. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. The quiet felt earned, like both of us were waiting for the other to say something we already understood. Finally, Marcus broke it. "Do you ever think about timing?" I frowned. "Timing?" "How people come into your life at exactly the wrong moment," he said. "Too soon, too late, never when you're ready." I stared at the glass in my hands. "Maybe there's no such thing as ready." He tilted his head. "Maybe not." He took a slow sip, then added, "Sometimes the wrong people show up and make you feel right anyway." "It doesn't make sense, but it happens." I looked at him then. The lamplight caught the edge of his face. Tired eyes, a faint scar near his jaw. The kind of calm that only comes after too many storms. There was no teasing in his voice this time, no playfulness, just honesty. "That's dangerous," I said quietly. "So is loneliness," he replied. The sentence hung there, simple and devastating. I set the glass down before my hands could betray me. "Why me?" I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. His gaze softened. "Maybe because you don't expect anything from me. You don't come with history. Just this moment." The way he said this moment made something in my chest twist. "I don't know what this is," I said. He leaned back, eyes never leaving mine, then stopped trying to name it. For a long stretch of seconds, neither of us spoke. The music hummed quietly, the world narrowing to the small distance between us. I could hear the faint rhythm of his breathing, see the way his hand curled loosely around his glass. He moved first, not closer, not yet, just a shift, a quiet gesture of being present. "You look like you're about to run," he said gently. "Maybe I should," I whispered, "but you won't." He was right. I didn't move. Instead, I said, "You scare me a little." "Good," he said softly. "Means you care enough to be afraid." Something broke in me then. Not loudly, just a small, silent crack. All the carefully built walls of professionalism and restraint started to crumble, leaving only the quiet ache beneath them. He set his glass aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't want to make this complicated, Ryan. He hesitated, eyes searching mine. "I don't want to feel like a ghost in my own life anymore." The rawness in his voice caught me off guard. "I get that," I said. "I really do." Our eyes met, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air heavier. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense. Not the sharp, fast kind. It was slower, deeper, like two halves of the same silence finding each other. He reached up, fingers brushing the side of my face, tentative, waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. The touch was light, almost reverent. My breath caught. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. "You don't have to," he murmured. "Just feel what's real." It wasn't a command, more like permission. When our foreheads touched, it wasn't electric or dramatic. It was quiet, grounding, a moment suspended between apology and need. And then, slowly, he kissed me. It wasn't the kind of kiss movies are made of. It wasn't desperate or hungry. It was hesitant, two people testing the edge of something fragile. His lips were warm, patient, almost cautious, like he was afraid to ruin it by wanting too much. For a heartbeat, everything in me went still. The noise, the guilt, the questions, all of it fell away, leaving only the simple, terrifying truth that I didn't want it to stop. When we finally pulled apart, I kept my eyes closed a moment longer than I should have. The air between us felt different, heavy with what couldn't be undone. Marcus exhaled, the sound low and steady. "You okay?" "I don't know," I said honestly. He nodded, as if that was enough. "Neither do I." Silence again. The record had stopped spinning, leaving the faint whisper of the needle in its groove. I stood first, because someone had to. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. "I should go," I said, though my voice came out softer than I intended. He nodded once. "I figured you would." I reached for the door but hesitated, turning back to look at him. He was still sitting on the sofa, head tilted slightly, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what?" "For crossing a line." He shook his head slowly. "Maybe some lines are just waiting for the right person to step over them." The words hit me harder than the kiss. I didn't reply. I couldn't. When I finally walked out, the door closing softly behind me, the hallway felt colder. My reflection in the elevator mirror looked unfamiliar. A mix of fear, guilt, and something else I couldn't name. I drove home in silence. The streets were empty again, but the quiet wasn't comforting this time. It pressed against me, heavy and alive. At a red light, I caught my own reflection in the window. The faint trace of a smile that didn't belong to someone sure of anything. I told myself I'd regret it, that I'd crossed into something dangerous. But as I sat there, the echo of that gentle, trembling kiss still lingering on my lips, I realized regret wasn't the word. What I felt was recognition, the sudden, terrifying clarity of knowing that something had changed, even if I didn't understand it yet, and maybe that was worse, because now I knew I'd go back. The week that followed felt like standing in a doorway that never stopped swinging. One minute I told myself it had meant nothing. That kiss, that night, the way my heart had tripped over itself when Marcus said my name. The next minute I'd catch myself checking my phone, hoping for something I didn't have the courage to name. But the silence stretched on. No orders, no messages, no reason to see him again. Then one Thursday evening my phone lit up with an unknown number. "Ryan?" His voice, calm but frayed at the edges. "Yeah," I said, pulse kicking up. "I'm sorry to call like this," he began, hesitating. Could you come over? Just for a bit?" Something in his tone, thin, uncertain, cut through every rational objection. "What's wrong?" I asked. There was a pause, a sound that might have been a sigh. "My husband's here. He came to pick up the last of his things." I didn't expect it. I sat frozen for a second, the words sinking in. "He's there now." Yes, his voice faltered. I don't want it to turn into a fight. I don't know why I called you, I just needed someone real in the room. Before I could overthink it, I was already grabbing my jacket. I'm on my way. The city felt heavier that night. The roads blurred under the headlights. My thoughts scattered across the asphalt. I wasn't sure what I was walking into or why I was doing it, but something inside me, a quiet, steady pull, refused to ignore him. When I reached the tower, the doorman barely looked up this time, just nodded toward the elevator. Maybe he sensed something different in the air, too. As the lift climbed, I caught myself breathing shallowly, my reflection pale and tense. 32. The soft chime sounded too loud in the quiet corridor. Marcus opened the door before I could knock. He looked different. His posture was rigid, his eyes shadowed. Behind him, I caught the faint sound of a woman's voice, measured, tired. "Come in," he whispered quickly. "Just stay quiet." The words barely made sense before he guided me down the hallway and into a side room. The study. It smelled faintly of paper and cedar, the air thick with unspoken things. "She doesn't know you're here," he added, shutting the door halfway. "Just stay until she's gone." And then he was gone too, his footsteps fading down the corridor. For a moment I stood in the dim half-light, staring at the row of bookshelves. The muffled voices filtered through the gap in the door. Hers was sharp but trembling, his low and steady. "You don't even try anymore," she said. "I used to know who you were. Now you're a stranger in this place." "I am trying," Marcus said quietly. "I just don't know what to do and trying doesn't change anything." Silence stretched, heavy enough to make my stomach knot. "You used to look at me like I was the only one in the room," she said softly now. "When did that stop?" I pressed a hand over my chest, trying to still the sound of my heartbeat. I didn't belong here, not in their story, not in this house filled with old ghosts. Marcus's voice broke slightly when he replied, "I don't know when. I wish I did." A pause, then the sound of footsteps, a bag being zipped. "I'll send the papers next week," she said finally. "It's easier that way." "Okay," he murmured. Then the click of the door. And quiet. I stood still for several long seconds before I heard him come back. When the door opened, Marcus looked years older, the lines around his mouth drawn tight. He leaned against the doorframe, exhaling shakily. "She's gone," he said. I nodded, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry you had to—" He stopped mid-sentence, rubbed a hand across his face. "God, that was awful." I hesitated. "Do you want me to go?" He shook his head. "No, please, I just need—" He trailed off, searching for the word, then found it. "Company." I stepped out of the study. The apartment felt different now, emptier somehow, though it had always been quiet. There was a stillness that bordered on grief. Marcus walked to the kitchen counter, poured himself a glass of water, then another, and handed one to me without looking up. His hand was trembling slightly. "I didn't plan any of this," he said after a while. "You know that, right?" "I know," he nodded, staring into his glass. "I thought I'd stopped feeling things like this. I thought I'd learned how to live without wanting." His voice cracked on the last word. "But then you showed up." The confession landed between us like a live wire. "Marcus," I started, but he shook his head again, cutting me off. "You reminded me what it feels like to be wanted for who I am, not for what I fix or provide or promise." The honesty in his tone left me breathless. I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, raw, unguarded. He wasn't performing. He wasn't even asking for anything. He was just telling the truth. "That's not fair to either of us," I said quietly. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But it's true." He moved closer, close enough that I could see the reflection of the lamplight in his eyes. They were tired, yes, but also full of something softer, something like gratitude. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. "Not with lust, not even with guilt, just with this quiet need to know you exist somewhere in the same city." My breath caught. I didn't know what to do with that kind of honesty. "You shouldn't say that," I whispered. "Then tell me to stop." But I couldn't. I stood there, heart pounding, every rational thought dissolving into the air between us. Tears stung unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't his words that broke me. It was the sincerity behind them. The way he said you reminded me what it feels like to be wanted, like it hurt to say it out loud. "I wish you hadn't found me that night," I said, "because now I don't know how to forget you." He reached out, brushing his thumb against my cheek before the tear could fall. "Maybe you don't need to forget. Maybe it's okay to remember the parts that made you feel alive." "It feels wrong," I whispered. "It feels human," he replied softly. "And that's the part I'd forgotten." The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else. I wanted to believe him, to let that statement be enough, to accept that whatever this was didn't have to be perfect to matter. But the weight of reality pressed down hard. He was rebuilding his life. I was standing in the debris of mine. I exhaled shakily and stepped back. "I need time," I said finally. He nodded, eyes steady on mine. "I'll wait." There was no pleading in his tone, no demand. Just quiet acceptance, like he understood the space I needed because he needed it too. I lingered for a moment longer, memorizing the stillness. The lamp's glow against the glass. The faint hum of the refrigerator. The way his shoulders slumped slightly, as if the act of being honest had worn him out. When I finally turned toward the door, he didn't follow. He just said, "Thank you for coming." I looked back once more. "You didn't really give me a choice." That made him smile, faint but real. "I know." Outside, the corridor was silent. The elevator light blinked patiently, waiting to carry me back down to whatever version of myself existed before tonight. As the doors slid shut, I caught a last glimpse of him standing there, not as the man from the towel, or the flirtation, but as someone fragile and real, stripped of everything but truth. The ride down felt endless. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall. Eyes red, lips pressed thin, shoulders tight. Yet somewhere beneath all that tension I felt something strange. Calm. For the first time in a long while I felt seen. Not as the delivery boy, not as the convenient distraction, just as me. When I stepped out into the night, the city lights seemed softer, blurred at the edges. The air carried a quiet hum, like the world had turned down its volume just enough to let me breathe. I leaned against the car door for a moment before getting in, letting everything wash over me. The confusion, the ache, the strange warmth that refused to fade. I didn't know what would happen next, or if anything would. But as I drove home, I realized something simple and terrifying. It didn't matter if this turned into a story or a mistake. What mattered was that, for a few brief hours, I'd stopped feeling invisible, and that, somehow, felt like enough. Time moved differently after that night. It didn't sprint or stall. It just drifted, like smoke through an open window, something that lingered even as it disappeared. I quit the pizza job 2 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. I just handed in my apron and told my manager I was tired. He nodded, didn't ask for a reason. I think he already knew. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work. It comes from feeling too much. Days bled into weeks. I started a new delivery job for a local courier service. Packages, not people's dinners. Easier, less personal. No small talk at the door. No lingering glances. No risk of finding someone who made the world tilt off its axis again. Sometimes, though, I caught myself driving past that tower downtown. I'd tell myself it was just habit, that it was on my route anyway. But each time, my eyes would lift toward the 32nd floor, waiting for a light that never came on. Marcus didn't call again, and I didn't reach out. We'd said what needed to be said. Maybe that was the only honest way to end something that never really began. Spring crept quietly into Portland, soft and steady. The trees along the park began to flush green again, and the city thawed from its winter silence. I learned how to fill my evenings with noise, music, podcasts, the hum of passing trains. But every so often, I'd catch the scent of cedar in a shop or the sight of lamplight on glass, and for half a heartbeat, it would pull me back. Then one Saturday afternoon, I walked into a cafe near the park, the kind of place that smelled like coffee beans and second chances. I'd been there before, enough that the barista knew my order. The place was busy, all chatter and clinking cups. I was halfway through stirring sugar into my drink when a voice I hadn't heard in months said my name. Ryan. It wasn't loud, but I heard it immediately. The sound seemed to slice through everything else in the room. I turned. Marcus stood near the doorway, a paper cup in hand. He looked different, older maybe, but in a good way. The lines on his face had softened. His hair was longer, flecked with a bit more gray at the temples. The tiredness that used to live in his eyes had been replaced with something else. Peace, maybe. "Marcus," I said, and the word felt unfamiliar and familiar all at once. He smiled, small but genuine. "I thought that was you." I gestured to the empty seat across from me. "You want to sit? Only if you don't mind." "Of course not." He sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The noise of the cafe filled the silence for us, easy and unforced. It was strange how calm I felt. No racing pulse, no invisible line humming between us. Just two people meeting again in daylight, No ghosts in the room this time. "You look good," he said finally. I laughed softly. "You mean less sleep-deprived?" "That too," he said, smiling. "There's color in your face again. I can tell you've been outside. Occupational hazard," I said. "I deliver packages now. Real professional stuff. Fragile. Handle with care. Don't leave at the door." "Very glamorous," he chuckled, the sound warm. "Still driving?" "Yeah. My car hasn't given up on me yet, which feels like a miracle." "Good," he said. "I'm glad you're still moving." Something in his voice made me look up. "What about you?" He glanced down at his cup, tracing the rim with his thumb. "I sold the apartment." That caught me off guard. "Really?" He nodded. "About 2 months ago. It was time. I needed walls that didn't remember everything." "Where'd you move?" "Small place near the waterfront," he said. "It's quieter, fewer ghosts. I can actually hear the gulls in the morning instead of the city hum." "That sounds nice," I said. "It is," he admitted. "Strange, though. I used to think noise meant life, but now I think silence does." We both smiled at that. It was the kind of line you could only say after living enough to mean it. "So," I said, "fresh start?" He nodded. "Of a sort. I'm working less, reading more, trying to learn what peace feels like when it's not borrowed from someone else." I looked down at my coffee. "That's good. It's honest," he said. "And honesty cost enough already." That silence again, soft and patient. There was no tension in it this time, only understanding. He leaned back, studying me for a moment. "You look freer too. Happier." I smiled faintly. "I think I am. Took me a while to stop thinking about what ifs." His expression softened. "And now?" "Now I think about what was," I said. "And that's enough." He nodded, a small flicker of gratitude passing across his face. "You know, I was afraid the last time you saw me would be the version that fell apart. The night with the papers, the arguments, all of it. It almost was," I admitted. "For a long time I thought it should be. Why? Because it hurt less to pretend it was a mistake than to admit it mattered." He was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "It mattered to me too." The way he said it, plain, unguarded, loosened something I hadn't realized was still clenched inside me. "More than I knew how to handle at the time," he added. I looked up, met his eyes. There was no hesitation in them now, no apology. Just the calm of someone who had made peace with his own past. We sat there for a long time, talking about everything and nothing. The traffic outside, the smell of spring, the cafe's overpriced muffins. It was easy, like breathing. He told me about his new place, how he'd taken up sketching again. Not architectural plans, but rough pencil drawings of streets and faces. Things that don't need to be built, he said. I told him about night drives along the river, how I'd started taking photos just to remember what stillness looked like. Somewhere in the middle of it, we both laughed, real, unforced laughter. And I realized how different this felt. We weren't trying to fix each other anymore. We were just two people who'd shared a chapter that still lived quietly in both of us. After a while, the cafe began to thin out. The sun shifted through the window, catching the faint silver in his hair. It made him look lighter, not older. He finished his drink, then looked at me with that same quiet half-smile I remembered from the first night. "You ever think we might stop calling it wrong one day?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, the man who'd changed the direction of my life without meaning to, and smiled back. "Maybe," I said finally. "Maybe we will." He nodded slowly, like he understood the weight behind that single word. When we stood to leave, he hesitated for a second, then stepped forward and gave me a brief hug. No tension, no hesitation, no hidden meaning, just warmth. The kind that says I see you, and I wish you well. When we pulled apart, he said, "Take care of yourself, Ryan." "You too, Marcus." He left first, disappearing into the slow-moving crowd outside. Through the window, I watched him cross the street, sunlight glinting off the edge of his sleeve. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Some stories don't end with goodbye. They just reach a point where silence says enough. I sat back down for a moment, letting the last of my coffee cool. The noise of the cafe returned. Soft laughter, grinding beans, clinking cups. But beneath it all, there was a stillness I hadn't felt before. I thought about how strange life could be. How a single knock on a door months ago had unraveled everything I thought I understood about love and loneliness. How something that began with a towel and a lie had turned into something real. Something that changed me, even if it didn't last. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even simple, but it was honest. And sometimes, that's enough. As I stepped outside, the air felt different, brighter somehow, like the city had exhaled. People passed by, laughing, talking, living. I joined them, walking without hurry, without wait. I didn't look back toward the cafe. I didn't need to. The chapter had closed, but it had left its mark. Soft, invisible, but permanent. Sometimes the right connection happens inside the wrong story, and that, I realized as the wind brushed my face, was still worth something. If you enjoyed this emotional story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Now tell me in the comments, do you think their connection was meant to be, or was it just the right moment at the wrong time? I'd love to know what you think.